news and views beyond the mainstream media.
This next announcement is serious news, and you won't hear it in the mainstream media. We're living in an age full of catastrophic events, and it's getting worse. But before we go on, remember this website, highgrounds.us. In the past 2 decades, natural disasters have increased by 800% within the U.S. alone. Cataclysms like Hurricane Katrina killed and displaced thousands because they were not prepared. And the 2008 economic collapse could happen again, but be much, much worse. So type this into your web browser, highgrounds.us. Highgrounds.us is your complete source for family survival necessities. You'll find food and water with a shelf life of 25 to 30 years, plus tents, portable containers, light, heat, first aid, and much more. Go to our website, highgrounds.us, or call 1-888-202-9094. Place your order now and be prepared. That's H-I-G-H, highgrounds.us. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Highgrounds.us.
You're listening to the Earth Needs Rebel Show, live from Dublin, Ireland, with your host, Kevin Bull. Join the rebels at freethinkingvoice.org. Apply to take the Rebel platform by emailing the rebels at the Earth Needs Rebel Show at freethinkingvoice.tv.
The higher you build your barriers, the taller I become. The farther you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can deny me, you can decide to turn your face away. No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it. No, you're doing me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone. Oh no, something inside so strong. Oh, something inside so strong.
Hello listeners, welcome back to Three Thinking Voice, the Earth Needs Rebel Show, broadcast on Orion Talk Radio from Tonawanda, New York, 1650 on the AM and global on the internet, and don't forget that tune-in radio feed. Now, the Sound of Freedom has moved to Sunday nights from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Tune in this week to hear Ryan Brooks at his new time. Well, it's the second week this week. Brooksy is back, and you can hear him Sunday night from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. right here on Orion Talk Radio, news and views beyond the Main Street media. Now, for archive purposes, again, this is hour 2 of the show, and the live show date, so you can connect things together if you're downloading MP3s, is it's Tuesday the 24th of September 2013. That's Tuesday the 24th of September 2013. So if you're listening on the Earth Needs Rebels breakfast shows, which are broadcast between midnight and 4 a.m. ET, weekdays, 5 days a week, and between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. GMT, and you're listening to those 4 1-hour back-to-back shows, and you're listening to this one, folks, you can then ID the other side of the show from that information by looking on RyanTalkRadio.com archive tab, the Earth News Rebels archives. Download it, or listen to it if you want to follow this particular show or any other show on that, for that basis on that. Now, I have with me today, and we're having a really interesting time again on part 3 on borderline personality disorder with Dr. David Allen, who is a Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. Now, the book, his latest book he's published, which is based really where we're going now, is called How Dysfunctional Families Spur Mental Disorders, and I really recommend you pick up on that. The information on where to connect is in the chat for this, so OrionTalkRadio.com, go to the chat tab and the Earth Needs Rebels chat, and it will be there on the archive as well. Just go back chronologically. But Dr. Allen, just to help listeners audibly as well, could you give us just a little bit of information on this point of how to connect up with you for your book and information there?
Well, the book's available, any online bookseller. And you can email me at dallen49@comcast.net. I have a blog on psychology today called A Matter of Personality. And then I have another personal blog called Family Dysfunction and Mental Health. And the web address is davidmlnmd.blogspot.com.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Dr. Allen. Now, we're continuing from before the break. I've lost track a little bit here, but we were covering an area, we're looking at family dynamics, and we were looking particularly at a child in a family where it could lead towards a problem where they might develop borderline personality disorder, and you were giving some examples. We looked back to the 60s changes to how that the family dynamics at that time changed, where mum became, rather than the person at home, was starting to become, on future generations, a person who was working and having a career, and the transitional period in between brought out some of the features we could see in families as a good example of how people would have divided views. So the child then accommodates divided views, and then there's a bit of that going back to mum as well, who's not sure which side of the fence she's on at that point. And that was the sort of picture you were painting for us, Dr. Allen. Do you want to take the ball back and go a little bit further in that?
All right, to sort of briefly summarize that a group like a family has to have rules by which it operates in order to function. Rules are culturally determined, but the culture often changes to the point where the children are exposed to different contingencies, like women entering the workforce and the feminist movement and everything, which unfortunately destabilizes a parental figure or both of them, because they're kind of conflicted also. I gave the experience of the woman that went to work in World War II and then had to go home and become a traditional housewife again. They had a taste of the more exciting career world that they had to kind of shove away, but their daughter's behavior reminds them of it, but at the same time helps satisfy their urge to do that because they vicariously live through the kids. So depending on what the parents' conflict is, this causes the children to develop self-destructive roles, certain things that they do over and over again. And I have some cute names for the various roles that develops, some of which I stole from a psychoanalyst named Sam Slip, and then a couple of them that I made. I found on my own, and I'll get to the role of the borderliner, which I call the spoiler role. And again, sometimes I get criticized for using cute names for these things. I'm not labeling the person, I'm labeling the role. There's a big difference, in fact. And if you don't understand that difference, you can't really help them, even though they're often convinced that the role they're playing is the real them, because they have to convince themselves in order to play the role accurately. So I gave one example before. Let me give another one. Let's say I'm sorry to pick on women, but since we're going with borderlines and they're predominantly women, although less so as time goes on, let's say that you come from a family where your mom is constantly after you to get married. When are you going to meet the right guy? What's the matter with you? I want to be a grandma, blah, blah, blah. And I said, just a never-ending stream. But at the same time, she's saying to everybody else who will listen what jerks all men are, including, of course, your father, the father of the girl. So she's saying you should get married, but all men are jerks. Well, as I said earlier, if you confront people with that contradiction, they'll get extremely defensive and angry, and the rest of the family will come and attack you, and they'll all say, "You're wrong for bringing this up. Change back. Shut the heck up." So you learn not to talk, and so you have to figure out some way. The whole family's threatened because the parents seem unstable by your behavior. Okay, so what can you do if you're being pushed to get married, but you're telling all men are jerks? Well, one way to do that would be either to marry a series of jerks or just date a series of jerks and not get married, depending on the balance of other factors that are going on at the same time. So that way you're proving your mom right that all men are jerks, but you're looking like you're making the effort to do what she's telling you to do, which is to get married. So it sort of solves the both ends of the double bind. So, most therapists are familiar with the woman that moves from one alcoholic to another. And she'll divorce one, and then so where does she ask her, where do you meet men? And, of course, she meets them at bars all the time. And, she's lived with an alcoholic, so she knows what the signs are to look for, but somehow she misses more red flags than a Chinese Communist Party rally and goes ahead and does it anyways. So you're wondering, is he that stupid? Or what's going on here? Well, her role in the family is to do that. So let's say if your mother has repressed ambition, your job is to be what she wanted to be but can't, but not quite succeed. So there's a double bind on the achievement of this role. So that's called the savior role. You're going to be your parent's savior. You get to do all the, I want my kids to have all the advantages that I never had. Okay, but you get threatened if I do. So if I achieve it, you get depressed. So somehow they'll finish medical school but flunk the licensing exam or something like that. Or there was one example that another therapist gave of a man who kept flunking an exam to become an accountant. And the explanation they come up with is, well, it was from a family who emphasized status, and he was supposed to pass the CPA exam with no effort. Not only pass it, but pass it with no effort. And so the therapist that wrote about this said he helped the person sort of rebel against the family's rules, so he did that by passing the test. But then I asked, well, if he rebelled by passing the test, then he must have been following the rules by flunking the test. So I think the family probably was worried about status, but more the fathers than the sons. Because if the son passed the CPA exam, he would have outdone his dad. So you get situations where people are pushed into professional degrees, and then the parents don't show up at the graduation because their flower garden needs tending. Something like that. So it's like you can't win, right? So it creates kinds of problems. If you've got a lot of repressed hostility, you can act out your parents' hostility, and that's where that superego lacuna, where the parents kind of wink, wink, nod, nod, while you're creating all kinds of havoc, as they're expressing, the kid is expressing all the repressed anger of the parent. In the borderline spoiler role, what's the basic issue? Okay, now this is prototypical, and I just got a criticism on one of my blogs saying we're not all like that, and you're right, you're not all like that. There's literally thousands of different presentations and variations on the theme, so I'm giving a kind of a prototypical theme. But the basic conflict is that the parents are conflicted about the whole role of being parents. And we've done genograms to come up with theories as to why they would develop such a conflict, and it usually becomes pretty obvious when you do that. But I'm not going to get into that right now, although that's an important question, because to explain like a psychotherapy patient's basis on their being reactive to the parents, then that just begs the question of, well, why are the parents doing what they're doing? But the parents seem to think that being a parent is the end-all and be-all of human existence, that they can't allow their child to experience even the slightest bit of unpleasantness or adversity. They must be protected at all costs. They must have everything they want, even if we have to sacrifice our shirts off our back to give it to them. But at the same time, the parents seem to hate the kids' guts. So, and they're constantly being criticized and invalidated. And invalidation is being told that you're so full of crap you don't even know what you yourself are feeling, let alone what's the same thing, way to behave. But the parents never actually stop them from doing anything. They just let them get.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, can I interject at this stage? I want to put something to you, because I think you're on the money, I really do. And I want to put something to you that is from my perspective, and I may be off beat here, but what I'm seeing in what you're describing in the parents' behaviour is from the same perspective of BPD in the black and white thinking, that because they're not in the middle ground in the way they're viewing things, then they're loading things to one side to the child, and to compensate and balance themselves, they're loading them to the other reactively with the child as well. So you're getting both ends, but not the middle that made sense in the first place.
Right, because they're conflicted.
Yes.
They want something, but they hate themselves for wanting it. Okay, so you can't please somebody that's conflicted, because if you give them what they say they want, they're unhappy, and if you don't give them what they say they want, they're also unhappy. And if they stick their heads in the oven, then it's your fault they killed themselves.
You can't win, can you?
You don't want it to be your fault, right? And because you care about your parents, even if they mistreat you, and I get into this argument all the time, oh, I really don't care about what my parents think. Well, if you didn't, you wouldn't be doing half the things you're doing, from my perspective. So it's not true. You do care. As much as you'd like not to care, you do. I'm sorry. There's something missing. Well, I don't want to have anything to do with my parents. Well, that's because of the way they're treating you. If they didn't do that, you probably want to have contact with them. Well, yeah, I guess I would, but they're never going to stop. Well, maybe they will, but that's a whole other issue I'll get into later. Okay, so if your parents seem to need you around constantly and they have a pathological empty nest syndrome if you grow up, and they're totally preoccupied with doing things for you. We have parents they call helicopter parents. They're not all spawning borderlines. It depends on a lot of other factors as well, but they'll actually go to a college kid's professor and yell at them for giving their kid a bad grade. I mean, you never used to see this when I was growing up. But they seem to hate your guts. So they seem to need you around, but they seem to hate you. Okay, so how do you give them what they need? Well, the solution is really ingenious. And again, this is prototypical, and I know there's a lot of variations. But if you destroy everything that they try to do for you in one way or another, sort of pee on it and devalue it, and never grow up, this solves the problem. Well, why? Well, first of all, you never grow up so they can constantly continue in their job as compulsive parents and never have to worry about a pathological empty nest syndrome. And second of all, you've now given them an excuse for their hatred. So they don't have to feel so bad about it. So what the kid is doing is managing the parents' feelings. When the parents are starting to feel too guilty, they get them angry. When they're starting to feel too angry, they make them feel guilty. So they're constantly balancing guilt, anger in the parents.
Yes.
And they're not going to tell you that, they're not going to tell a therapist that they're doing this. And they do it so automatically that they don't even have to think about it.
Which is why in sessions they want to arrange for you to function as a parent role. As in, play out with them. Because they can't continue functioning unless you do.
Well, they could, but they wouldn't be comfortable with it. But on the other hand, they really want to be helped. That's where the therapist gets the leverage.
So you've got a dual role even with the client in that sense, that you've got the two poles there right in front of you. They want to be helped on one hand. On the other hand, they want to act out.
But on the very act of being a therapist means you're a helper, which puts you right automatically in the parent's role that I just described of wanting to take care of them.
Yes.
So the paradox in therapy is I'm going to make you independent. Well, I mean, if I'm doing it, then how are you being independent, right?
Mm.
But that's the therapist's job, is to make themselves obsolete. Now, there's one other concept I have to sort of add in here to really explain why that is that the kid that's in this horrible spoiler role, where they have to ruin everything, they lose all the designer clothes their parents buy for them, or they get it torn up, or they get into trouble, or they flunk out of school and they won't study and they play video games all day, whatever. That's a hard role to do because it's miserable. They're not happy people. Anybody thinks that these people are happy is out of their minds. They're miserable. So in order to keep playing the role, it's difficult. So there's two ways to force yourself to continue to play these roles, okay? One way is to denigrate any impulse that you have that would make it more difficult to play the role. So if there's a part of you that really wants to be responsible and grow up, you've got to kill that part of yourself off. So this is where defense mechanisms and irrational thoughts come in. Well, I can't really succeed as a female doctor because I'm too stupid. Well, but gee, your IQ's 148. Nah, I'm really just too stupid. Well, that's an irrational thought, right? But it serves a purpose. It's the cognitive therapists think that people think irrational thoughts because we're basically irrational, or we just adopted whole hog these thoughts from our families without any critical thinking whatsoever. And again, that presumes that people are just incredibly stupid. And I don't really, even though that people do a lot of really stupid things, I really don't believe they're that stupid. So one thing you do is I call that mortification. It's a fancy word for killing off part of yourself. And that was a word that now it means sort of like embarrassment does, severe embarrassment. But in the early part of the 1900s, it meant what I was saying it does. If you listen to like Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, they talk about mortification. And it's usually if you fall in love with somebody in a lower class, you have to mortify your love for that person. So they had and of course they would never actually say it was class conscience. They'd have like there's one called Iolanthe where it's fairies and mortals. And a fairy falls in love with the mortal, so she's got to mortify her. I mortify my love because it's against the rules, you know. So they're using it, so they all knew it. The Victorians all knew what that meant. Yeah. But we just think it's embarrassing. So you kill off part of yourself. The other way to stay in character is you enlist other people to help you out. Okay? So you'll marry somebody that will help you continue to be in the spoiler role. And this often is somebody, a male with narcissistic personality disorder. And again, I'm stereotyping with males and females. There are narcissistic females, more and more of them, and borderline males. We're becoming more egalitarian, but I'm using the sort of prototypical one.
Yes.
So the narcissist role is something I call the little man. He usually grew up in a family where his mother really wants to be independent but isn't allowed by her cultural rule. So she usually marries a loser so she can really be in charge, and then looks to her little man, the son, to be her hero. But every time the little man, who's not really equipped to be her hero because he's way too young, every time he tries to do something for it, she cuts his legs out from underneath him, or as the analyst would say, she cuts his you-know-what. So the mother looks like she needs help all the time, but if you try to help her, she won't let you. I had one guy that it was the grandmother. She broke her hip in the bathroom, and she wouldn't unlock the door so he could come in to help move her out. You go, I don't want to trouble you. I thought, wow. So he grows up in this sort of with a help complaining, rejecting mother, and guess what the spoiler role is? They're basically help rejecting complainers. Anything you do is never good enough, right? So you marry somebody like that, and they help you stay in that role by trying to dominate you and fix you all the time, just like your parents were. And, of course, you're helping them to stay in the role of the little man by being this self-rejecting complainer. And that can be very, very volatile and leads to all kinds of severe violence. And it's not just male-female. It's often both ways. Obviously, the males tend to do more damage, but females can use weapons. As
you found out in your earlier experiences.
Right, So it's not all somebody saying, oh, you're blaming the victim, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not a question of blaming the victim. I get into this all the time. Just to kind of just take a side role, there was a woman, a college girl that got drunk and passed out and was raped at a party. Okay, well, I'm not saying that it was her fault that she got raped, but I am saying it was her fault that she did something really stupid. I mean, maybe she didn't have to be raped. She could have been robbed. Or she could a lot of bad things, or nothing could have happened. But to say that she did something really stupid is, oh, no, you're blaming the victim. No, I'm not. No, if I'm a judge, the rapist goes to jail and she gets off scot-free. But to say that she had no responsibility for what happened at all, that's just not accurate, right? So we get into this. We try to avoid blame here and just look at what people are actually doing. We're not condoning or approving of anything that they're doing. Anyways, but getting back to my original point, you enlist a helper, so we get males and females who marry each other to help each other maintain these horrible roles that they learned in their own families, which creates a problem for them because they're constantly driving each other crazy because they're conflicted over the role themselves, so the very thing that they married each other for eventually gets on their nerves.
Right, at this point, we're going into the final break on here. We've got 22 minutes to the other side, and if we can hold it exactly where we are, we'll pick it up in 2 or 3 minutes to the other side of the break, Dr. Allen, if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Yes, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine on this little light of mine.
Real alternative radio. We are OrionTalkRadio.com.
Since 9/11, the people of the United States have sadly witnessed the largest transformation in our nation's history. And since then, we've collectively been terrorized over and over again by flag-waving politicians and the corporate news media. We've been sold a nebulous, never-ending war on terror. We've been psychologically conditioned with fear through repeated, endless warnings. A Patriot Act that threatens our democracy. A Military Commissions Act that disregards our Bill of Rights. A homegrown terrorism act that makes us all a threat. And an oppressive fascist state before you know it. Have you ever asked yourself, of all the government failures on 9/11, how is it that our politicians made us pay the price? Don't buy the lie. We're Americans, and we don't give up our Constitution to anyone, terrorists or politicians. We fought wars just to have these rights, and at Orion Talk Radio, we're damn well going to fight to keep them.
Orion USA Radio News, I'm Hope Duggar. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he does not support the effort by Texas Senator Ted Cruz to block consideration of the House bill that keeps the government operating into December while eliminating funding for the health care law.
Not only does it defund this terrible law, it doesn't increase government spending by a penny, and it keeps the government from shutting down.
But McConnell and Senator John Cornyn of Texas made clear that when Senate Democrats move to reinstate funding for the health care law, they'll vote no. A Utah man accused of plotting a deadly attack on an outdoor shopping center in the heart of Salt Lake City this week told investigators he planned to, quote, just randomly shoot and kill people. Jack Harry Stiles told a crisis counselor he was preparing to kill as many people as possible on Wednesday because it marked the anniversary of his mother's death. Jail records show Stiles was booked into the Salt Lake County Jail Monday and remains there on $1 million bail. This is IRN USA Radio News.
You probably knew that Thomas Edison gave us the first commercial light bulb. But did you know he invented alkaline batteries and an electric train? Edison said if we all did the things we're capable of, we would astound ourselves. Hi, how in the world are you anyway? I'm Andy Willoughby. For almost 2 decades, I've been helping families build home businesses. Many have been astounded at what they've been able to achieve. Today, I want to introduce you to my newest and most exciting home business concept ever. It's MaxAchieve.com. If you'd like to earn $500 to $5,000 or more a month working from home, check out MaxAchieve.com. This is more than a home business. At MaxAchieve, we want to help you experience more success in all areas of your life. To find out how you could astound yourself, go to MaxAchieve.com. That's MaxAchieve.com. Or call 800-801-3465. 800-801-3465.
President Obama delivered.
Imagine a world with natural clouds, clean air, clean water, and natural food. Why in the world are they spraying? If you love your family, if you love your children, if you love our planet, it's time to get involved. In 2010, millions of people were awakened to the question of what? Now the next question that remains to be answered is, why in the world are they spraying? An investigative look into one of the many agendas associated with chemtrail geoengineering programs, weather control. Why has our weather been changing? Are the long white lines in the sky changing our weather? Could there be a monetary and political agenda behind these damaging programs? Why in the world are they spraying? Order your copy today at www.whyintheworldaretheyspraying.com. Why in the world are they spraying?
And if you control the weather, you're going to control the planet. It's that simple.
DependableVoice.com, the total solution, one-stop shop for your business telecommunications needs. Nationwide business class telecommunications services, providing voice and data, voice over internet, and hosted PBX. Dependable Voice is now offering the first month free for any voice over internet and hosted PBX services. Save up to 50% on your current phone bill and save thousands of dollars with no need to purchase PBX hardware. Hosted PBX and voice over internet services include free local and long-distance calling to the U.S., Canada, and Caribbean. Email to voicemail, follow-me services, multiple visual call reports, dynamic auto attendant, advanced ACD and call queue, unified voice and fax messaging, and much, much more. Plus, get your first month free with a minimum 3-phone system. Call Dependable Voice today at 1-888-346-1085 or visit them online at dependablevoice.com. That's dependablevoice.com. Dependable Voice, the total solution for business telecommunications.
Hey, this is Ken from the Information Nation. Join me every Sunday night from 9 to 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 to 10 Central Time, live right here on Orion Talk Radio.
I'm gonna let it shine. There's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. There's a little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Yes.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Three Thinking Voice, the Earth Needs Rebel Show, broadcast on Orion Talk Radio from Tonawanda, New York, 1650 on the AM, global on the internet, and don't forget that TuneIn radio feed. Live afternoon radio returns to Orion Talk Radio with Live Truth, hosted by Brian Lang. Brian brings a determined passion to broadcasting 6 days a week, Monday to Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. and Sunday 5 to 7 p.m. ET. Check your radio schedule and make room for Live Truth afternoons right here on Orion Talk Radio. Right, we have today, if you joined us on the last section of this, I'm just giving an introduction. We have Dr. David Allen, Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, and he has his latest book is How Dysfunctional Families Spur Mental Disorders, a really interesting perspective, and we're looking at borderline personality disorder. If you just come on board on this section, you can pick up the rest on the archives, obviously. And I'm going to pass the ball back to David Allen before the break, as he's building up some behaviour type groups, family related areas, to get a picture of the kind of experiences within the family group. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Dr. Allen, at this point, and follow you through.
Okay, well, we were talking about the people play a role in their families in order to stabilize the parents in a way, even though the whole family is unstable, and in the long run this backfires because the problem never actually gets discussed or worked out. But because, and this also ties into the analytic concept of a conflict or in your mind between two conflicting impulses. If the parents are very conflicted and the child's behavior plays into that conflict, then the parent gets more unstable than they already are. And these families are often pretty unstable to begin with. But the results can be serious, very serious, in terms of the reactions of both the parents and the rest of the family that gangs up on the poor person and says, you know, how can you treat your mother this way, if they try to do something different. And people will try to get rid of parts of themselves that conflict with this role that they play, and they'll enlist other people to help them play that role. And they're very good at getting other people to play it. The analysts have another concept called projective identification, and most of the people that are like me don't really agree with that concept as the analysts perceive it. But the way I view it is that they are in an attempt getting you to become help them with their role by getting you to act just like their parents do. So when they come to therapy, they will try to get the therapist to act like the parents do. And they have various mechanisms for doing that. And if one doesn't work, they have backup plans. And if those don't work, they have backup plans to that. However, the good news is if nothing works, then they stop doing that. And the reason they stop doing that is they really are usually coming for help. And even though they're trying like heck to get the therapist to act just like their parents, they really hope they'll fail and that the therapist will act differently. So people that deal with borderline personality disorders have to develop ways to get the patients to quit doing that or quit acting out with them, because otherwise they'll have people stalking them, they'll have people calling them all night long, not letting them off the phone, threatening suicide every 5 seconds, cutting themselves in the office, doing all kinds of horrible things. And it turns out that all the purveyors of all the major schools start out basically with the same sort of tricks. And I'm not going to go into those tricks, but we all do the same thing. And then we diverge after that because they're survival skills for therapists. So if you don't act like the parents do, then they calm down and quickly. And obviously in severe cases it's not that easy, but in most cases it's not hard. And most therapists don't believe me when I tell them that. But I trained residents who didn't take any psychology undergrad. They've only had the medical perspective, and I could teach them to do it. So it's not that difficult, really, if you know the tricks of the trade. And on my blog, I have a series called How to Disarm a Borderline that goes into, when they do this is what you do, in order to get them to quit acting out with you. Because really, and if they really aren't coming for change, then they'll leave therapy and find somebody that they can get to act like their parents. And they're notorious for causing what we call boundary violations, where they can get otherwise somewhat ethical therapists to do unethical things. Of course, they're also potential victims because some of the victimizers, therapists that do want to sleep with their patients, for instance, know who to pick on. They know who's going to do it and who makes a lousy witness against them if it ever does come into court. And unfortunately, people with borderline personality disorder fill that bill. So if you are an unethical therapist, and I think those people should basically be shot or hanged, figuratively speaking, of course, then you're going to be in trouble. So that's when you get people that tell you their last therapist slept with them. And I'm always amazed they came back to see another therapist. I mean, having been betrayed all of their life from their point of view and being betrayed again by a helper takes a certain amount of guts or stupidity, I'm not sure which, to go and try again. But maybe they really aren't ready to give up yet. Okay, so that part of it is getting them to quit doing it to you as the therapist. But then you're still left with the fact that the parents can shape their behavior in general way more powerfully than a therapist, in my opinion, can ever do. I think I mentioned on one of the earlier broadcasts that we have cells in our brain and fear tracts in the primitive part of our brain that respond just to one parent or the other. And those tracks are hard to extinguish, and they can be overridden, thankfully, but they never really go away completely. So when I first got into this, I tried to train people to be more assertive with their families, and they'd come out and they'd leave therapy all full of themselves and ready to go, and the next week, of course, they'd come back with their tail between their legs. They couldn't do any of it. And that happened again and again, and I realized, well, I'm no match for these families. I got to figure out some way to get them on my side, which is also difficult because therapists are known to blame everything on mom and dad, and blame is very toxic in all families. It's not a question of whose fault it is. It's either nobody's fault or everybody's fault. That's not the point. Again, I'm not a judge, so I don't have to judge guilt. We just want to look at what are the patterns, why are they happening, and how can we fix them. We don't get into whose fault it is. And usually parents are okay with me as a therapist usually because somehow that gets conveyed. I see individual patients. I'm not a family therapist. I have a hard enough time following the action with one person. I really admire the people that can sit with a whole family and watch this because things happen so fast that it's amazing. In the old days, when family systems therapy first started, they'd have 4 therapists. 2 would be in the room with the family, and the other 2 would be out behind a one-way mirror, and they'd phone in comments because figuring the people in the room probably were missing things. Unfortunately, that's too expensive for most people to afford.
I would imagine it is. I would imagine it is at that, certainly. It's fascinating that, of course, the speed is amazing with this sort of thing because it's so automated with the family being together for so long that you're going to get very, very fast processing that's so automatic that it must be incredibly difficult to follow.
I can't do it. So I have to slow it down. So after I gain the patient's cooperation, again, there's certain tricks to get them, because they have a reputation for distorting what's really happening, and that's usually because they'll give you a global judgment but won't describe what they mean, or they'll say something something that's true, but they'll say it in a very misleading way, and that's why they get a reputation for distorting everything, because then maybe you'll meet the father and they don't seem to be anything like the patient described. But you don't really know what's going on because you don't have a camera on them 24 hours a day to see. And the patients will contradict themselves. That's why they get noticed for being all one way or all the other, the splitting thing. And some people take that seriously as a mental defect that they have. But I found that they're actually very good judges of character, and they don't split. You just have to figure out how can both of the seemingly contradictory things they say can both be true in some ways. It's called dialectical thinking. You have the thesis or the idea and the antithesis or the opposite. What's the synthesis? How can both of them be true? So I think we were talking a little bit earlier about something called the Columbo style of questioning, where instead of telling them, why are you contradicting yourself, like they're mentally defective, you play kind of stupid, where you say, well, you said this, and then you said that. I don't see how those fit together. I don't know. You play like, you're the non-compos mentos person, and you can't figure it out. You need their help. And they become very helpful. It's amazing how helpful they can become when you act like you need help from them. Well, that puts them in the helping position, which is very unusual for them. They're not used to that, but they kind of like it. So they'll help clarify, and they'll tell you things that they might not otherwise divulge. So then you start getting the whole story, and you've got to get it in chronological order. They'll relate a conversation, they'll leave out half of it. Or I'll say, well, what did your father say next when you said that? Oh, he didn't do anything. Well, it's impossible not to do anything. What, did he just sit there and stare at you? Did he throw up his hands and walk out of the room? Did he do a somersault? What? You got to ask follow-up questions, in other words. You got to be a good journalist. Everything they say can be interpreted in multiple ways, and you've got to find out what's the actual interpretation. So what we're looking for is blow-by-blow descriptions of interactions over the problem that you've identified, and who says what to whom, and in what order, and then what do they do, and what happens if you do this, and what happens if you do that. I'm not saying you should do those things, because we don't know what's going to happen until we figure that out, and most people can predict what their parents are going to do, because they've lived with them, for so long, and they're pretty accurate. In fact, when I plan a strategy, we use role-playing as a strategy. I have them play their parent and show me what they're up against. And I'll try to bring up the problem in various ways using different strategies, and we'll see what kind of problems it creates. Well, when I first started doing that, it was like a revelation. It was like, my God, no wonder you act like that. Would they really do that? And I go, yeah. Although sometimes when they get frustrated and they want to make their parents out to be worse than they are, they'll say, yeah, they would, and then you kind of look at them funny, and they go, well, I guess maybe they wouldn't. I go, really? They go that far? But they go far. I mean, talk about it. This is the invalidation thing that the author Marshall Linehan talks about, where they just do everything they can to make you feel like the smallest person on the face of the earth, and no better than an amoeba, because you're bringing this stuff up. And you go, no wonder you don't want to talk about it. So it's very difficult even when we come up with a strategy, because I'll try out various strategies, and we'll usually come up with something that might work. And they've tried a lot of these, because they're often very smart people, so they're very skeptical. They go, you don't know my family. They're the worst family you've ever seen in your life. There's no way they're going to go for this. Well, actually, I've probably seen worse. I've seen some every time I think I've heard everything that parents can do to their own kids, man, am I in for a surprise. Unbelievable. And the kids the adult children give out as good as they get, which is, again, I get in trouble for saying that, but it's true. You learn this from them, and so you're kind of alike in that ways, and borderline women, or women with borderline personality disorder especially, hate to be paired to their mothers in any ways, but I'll say, well, you're not clones, but both of you are kind of doing the same thing. Yes. Because I'm trying to develop some empathy for why if you can see why you're doing it. Yeah. Maybe your mom has a similar reason for doing the same thing, and it's not quite as, not excusing what mom did, but trying to understand it. So to figure out how do we get past the parents' defenses, because they're very formidable defenses, just like the patients are very formidable, and that's the therapist has to get past them. But you have to sort of train them to be the therapist. And I will interview other family members, but I have a very specific protocol so I don't get into that problem of I can't follow the action. I have to find a way to slow it down. So I only bring them in one at a time with the patient there, and I have a very strict protocol I follow to make sure that things don't get out of hand. And if it starts to get out of hand, I will end the conjoined session. But people say, well, how do you know any of this is true if you haven't got the parent side of the story? Well, actually, I have got the parent side of the story, because I do that. And people bring me tapes of conversations with their parents that when the parents don't know that they're being recorded. Illegal in some states, but not illegal for me to listen to. And I've had the parents of patients with borderline personality disorder as patients themselves. And I've even had a situation where I had one trainee seeing the mother and another one seeing the daughter, talking about the same interactions and comparing them. And if you don't do that, you don't know what's going on, okay? But it tells you what kind of questions to ask to get a more accurate portrayal. So sometimes I'm surprised, or there's some aspect of it they left out. But usually I'm not all that surprised. And the parents some of them are just amazing. Not only will they talk about it, it's like they're dying to talk about it.
Oh, and other stuff.
And other parents are even worse than their parents, than their adult children portrayed them. I had one mother that came in with her daughter and started validating her the minute she sat down, and I couldn't get her to stop.
Oh, God. I've got to ask you a question, because I think this is going to be on listeners' lips as well, because you're looking at a very fast process. And we talked of the early stages of this, where you might have full therapists involved, where you have two the other side of a mirror, two in the room, and trying to pick up everything live in the interactions, etc., etc. What has happened with seeking agreement and recording sessions and working with those recording afterwards? Is it that it's not live enough to use that, or is there a reason that's not used?
Well, it's used in training. I mean, we used video. We used to, when I was in training in the 70s, I had to write down copious notes during the session and go over them, everything that happened with all the details. But now that was before the VCR came out. So now when I was training residents, we do tape their sessions and we go over it and I point out things that are going on. So we do that, but only in training. Once you get out of training, people go to workshops, they read books and stuff like that. But they don't usually record. It's hard to do it in private practice anyways. You'd have to get the patient's permission.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't show it. I mean, they'll compare notes verbally with other therapists, but it's not quite the same. So it is used in training, but only in training mostly. I mean, you very rarely see it in people that are active professionals that aren't in training.
The other question I put in this, I don't want to take you too far off this, but of course there can be a lot of anger associated with BPD, and I wonder, does a lot of this come from the fears of where they are, and in the acting out, it can be very pressured on the person, you being the therapist, that they would get quite intense during this, really.
Well, anger is a major issue, but I validate the anger. I said, no wonder you're angry. I'd be angry if I were in your shoes as well. If they're angry at me, I'll say, sorry, tell me what I did that you're so ticked off about. Let's talk about it. In fact, that's a rule I tell at the beginning of therapy. If I piss you off, you might not, in everyday conversation, you might not tell me that, but as a therapist, I need to know, because you might be right. So generally, they don't act out the anger in the session, and they sort of know that if they did attack me, I wouldn't be able to see them anymore. So I haven't really had a problem with. But in the first hour that we talked, I talked about when I didn't know some of these tricks, and I enraged the patient by wanting to discharge her from the hospital. And when they're in a rage, a real one, you don't want to be in the room. It's really horrible. But a lot of times when they're in a rage, it's feigned. It's part of their spoiler role. Oh, they misinterpret everything that you say. They twist your words around. Mm-hmm. They attribute the worst possible motivations to you at the beginning. If you respond to that correctly, they stop doing that. That's, again, the nice part. Although occasionally I got a patient that won't. I had one patient that basically came in and insulted me, told me how miserable I was, but she kept coming back week after week. Well, if I'm such a horrible therapist, why are you here? But I should have cut that off. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can go you can be too empathic.
Yeah.
I should have said, look, I'm not going to sit here and be abused all. If you want to work on this, fine. Otherwise, find another therapist. I really should have done that at some point. But my fallback position is to be, oh, well, I can see why you're so angry. Let's see if we can work this out. But like I said, you can go too far with anything.
Right.
We're just as prone to splitting as they are.
Yeah, I suppose so, really. We've got a couple of minutes of show time left. I just want to do a short reflection to you on what you said here, because looking where you are, it can get pretty intense at times if, with other family members or with the therapist, shall we say. And when you see these incidents, I can't help looking at that and seeing, hello, this person has suddenly lost all empathy here in the situation. They're intensely angry, and there's nothing there going to protect the other individual, where we are at that time, and that then comes back up again afterwards. Is that the same as we get in other disorders, where you do definitely get a drop of empathy, as well as the acting out, allowing that person not to allow for the other person's situation in their interaction?
Well, I think it's important with all therapy patients, especially those with personality disorders, for the therapist to find the rationality in their behavior and find out the good. I always say, you must have a good reason for doing that, because it seems to be bringing you so much pain, and I don't believe in masochism. And they look at you like, gee, nobody ever accused me of having a good reason for anything. It's like so refreshing. There's got to be a good reason you're not doing this because you're stupid or masochistic. Or they say, well, yeah, I'm that stupid, or my mom's that stupid. And I go, well, I don't know. You seem pretty smart to me. I can't believe you come from that bad little gene pool. Sometimes a little humor. So, yeah, I think trying to understand, look for the hidden rationality and the hidden sense. And you can't judge the rationality of a behavior unless you know what the goal of the behavior is. That's another thing that the therapists, they mistake the behavior for the goal. The behavior is not the goal. The behavior is designed to get other people to do certain things.
Yes.
So unless you know what they're trying to get you to do and why, you can't judge the rationality of what they're doing.
I think we're heading in the direction of needing at least another episode here. It's getting more and more fascinating as we're going on, Dr. Allen. I do like your views from your perspective, very individual perspective, which are absolutely fascinating. Would you come back again, cut another episode, and see where we finish up at the end of that? Because this is very, very interesting. I think it's going to be for listeners.
Okay, sure, I'd love to.
We'll work that out with you after the show and work out a date. Stay with me on that, David. But I want to, first of all, thank you again, because I think this is a great eye-opener. I really do. I'm quite genuine about that with you, Dr. Allen, in that sense, because your views are very important, because I think you're catching all of the psychological side of this so well, and you're going right back behind it, which unless you do that, you're not really going to get hold of this at all. That's the point. We're going at the end of the show. But thank you once again, my friend, for coming on and doing this for listeners.
Thanks again for having me.
That's a pleasure. Right, listeners, thank you for listening to Three Thinking Voice, the Earth Needs Rebel Show, broadcast on Orion Talk Radio. I can tell you that Dr. David Allen will be back with us. We will be notifying you of dates on that when we book in with Dr. Allen after the show. And we will be back tomorrow between 1 and 3 p.m. with another great show. Thank you for listening.
Gotta get me home to my favorite side. Ride.
Flawless Science believes you deserve the right to have a long and healthy life. You deserve to have toxin-free air and water and foods rich in minerals and nutrients. Factory farming, genetically modified foods, and thousands of environmental contaminants are polluting our world and stripping your right to healthy life away from you. FlawlessScience.com helps you regain these rights. FlawlessScience.com makes natural products and provides the best nutraceutical products to enhance your quality of life, your state of health, and well-being. So whether you're struggling with obesity, diabetes, hypertension, memory loss, allergies, high cholesterol, neuropathy, or to spice things up in the bedroom, FlawlessScience.com is here to help you. FlawlessScience.com ships quickly worldwide in discreet packaging and will never sell your information to anyone for any reason. For all your wellness, weight control, extreme muscle building, and nutraceutical needs, visit FlawlessScience.com today.
At Orion Talk Radio, we're constantly working hard on your behalf. But the fight for freedom could not be fought without you. So we want to hear what you have to say at